It's a $5 trillion industry in which we do not have enough doctors for the demand, because we will look more like Japan by 2035 in terms of our aging population. And we don't have enough primary care. We don't have enough nurses to serve that. There's just so many reasons why technology is essential and imperative for this space.
Yo, it's the future, don't hit the snooze. AI is here giving humans the boost. Team Humans rolling, brains in the game with Dan Turchin. Y'all remember the name. People reign in the mix, no stopping the flow. Better work, better life, yeah, we're ready to go. Robots and humans, a collab, you know. Okay, let's start the show.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work, episode 375, and it's a special one. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing. We get asked all the time, how can you meet other listeners? Join the newsletter. It's not spammy. We share some fun facts and things that don't always make it into the main episode. There will be a link in the show notes. We are all in this together. If you like what we do, please share this episode or any other with just one friend. That's all we ask. They'll know you care about using AI to make humans better. And if someone you know shared this with you, tell them thanks and pay it forward. If you leave a comment, I may share it in an upcoming episode, like this one from Samantha in Chicago, who is an orthopedist. Samantha's favorite episode is number 153. With Dr. Shiv Rao, a great one, founder of A Bridge, about how AI is fixing the biggest problem faced by doctors. We learn from AI Thought Leaders Weekly. Of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Here it is for today. Eduardo Gribaldi writes in the Vatican News about a recent conference held at the Vatican titled AI in Medicine, the Challenge of Human Dignity. He summarized the key theme of the event this way: we must not fall into the temptation of humanizing technology, nor of mechanizing the human being. A spokesperson warned of the risk of transforming health and illness into mere numerical data, stressing that the patient is a complex living experience made up of emotions, fears, and feelings. Another spokesperson said the ability to personalize treatment remains an irreplaceable medical skill. It's not a matter of immediately declaring tools like ChatGPT good or bad, but of understanding how they work. Of course, we will share a link to the full episode in the show notes. My commentary: the intersection of AI, faith, and well-being is fascinating. I celebrate that this conversation is happening in the hallowed halls of power in the Vatican. I hope more of this progressive dialogue that confronts the intersection of traditional doctrine with science in the months and years ahead. Let's not evaluate modern day life or technology based on naive and strict interpretations of millennia-old religious texts. Let's use the elements of every faith that preach compassion to inform how we accelerate the introduction of AI into how we care for both those in need of treatment and everyone else. I expect places that deliver care to be radically different in a decade when AI truly democratizes access to healthcare. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, Lynne Chou O'Keefe is the founder and managing partner of Define Ventures, one of the largest firms focused on early-stage health tech companies with $800 million in assets under management. Lynne and Define have driven $23 billion in exit value through investments in companies like Hims & Hers, Livongo, and Evolent. Prior to Define, Lynne was a senior partner at Kleiner Perkins, focused on digital health. And before that, she worked at Abbott Vascular and Guidant. Lynne has been named Wall Street Journal's Women in Venture Capital to Watch, Fierce Healthcare's Women of Influence, and Rock Health's Top 50 Icon honoree. She's a frequent speaker on topics related to health tech and a well-respected authority on the future of healthcare. Lynne received a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Stanford University, go Cardinal, and an MBA from Harvard. And you know what? For full disclosure, Lynne is a good personal friend and an amazing human. We quite literally got each other through undergrad together. and I think I'm allowed to share, because this is my podcast, that I gave Lynne a big hug at graduation on the football field, probably before I gave my parents a hug. I think that's true, Lynne, huh?
That's totally true. I remember studying long nights at Stanford, tackling whatever subject it might have been, CS, material science or otherwise, Dan. So we got each other through undergrad for sure. And, big fan of you. And so you should add that to the list of everything that you said.
A special bond. Well, Lynne, gosh, I went through your background, but share a little bit more with our audience about who is Lynne Chou O'Keefe and how'd you get to where you are today?
Well, I'm the daughter of two immigrants who moved here to get their masters and ultimately their PhDs. We clipped coupons, and the really classical immigrant story. I actually grew up in the Midwest in St. Louis, Missouri. So go Cardinals if anyone's a baseball fan here. And I do like to talk about things sometimes in baseball analogies. But since being here, and of course, Stanford and being on the West Coast bit the bug, I'm a true Warriors and 49ers fan now too. But I think that gives a lot of humble beginnings in terms of how I see innovation. My dad was a small business entrepreneur. My mom was a corporate, executive. And I always joke I'm somewhere in between. And I think you have to be that way in healthcare. There's a lot of large companies out there, both payer or health systems or otherwise, that you have to work with, but still having that entrepreneurial drive to reimagine and redefine, which was one of the names of why Define became Define, of how healthcare could be in the future. And so that's something that's maybe not on the LinkedIn, Dan. And I think, from having known each other so well and coming out here on the West Coast, always imagine the possibilities of what could be. And I think there's a lot of what could be in healthcare and what should be in healthcare that I'm sure we'll talk a lot about here.
I know that fixing healthcare has always been a passion for you since your earliest days, Abbott, etc. How do you describe what's broken about the system, and why are you so bold as to think that you and Define can fix it?
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of why now, if you will. And I think there are three major segments that have really been fueling healthcare and innovation, and more specifically, technology's integration with healthcare. I'll tell you a quick story personally. So, when I was really debating, I was coming out of my grad school. I knew that healthcare was a big area. I had not completely dedicated yet to it. And I went to a hospital and I saw a pacemaker switch out. So here I am. You can imagine the Seinfeld episode, the Junior Mint episode, if you will. And I'm here in Scrubs and I'm like, don't fall or trip. There's literally a human here being operated on. And what was so impressive to me, obviously being at Stanford and seeing what technology could do across sectors, but then seeing how little technology had done in that surgical suite, and the black and white grainy nature of seeing how doctors view their patients and their internal organs and everything, to how paper was still on, the desk, if you will, to guide information flow. It was just so archaic. But yet, in the same time, I was seeing a pacemaker switch out. We were merging the human body with technology, truly physically. But there was so much more that we could do. So that is kind of like that aha moment. And, I didn't have the Junior Mint scene, so thank God, being in that surgical suite. But the aha moment of being influenced in the Valley for so long, that healthcare would just be such an impactful life's work. And I think, Dan, you were very much, and I know this about you and is about me, we just want this to be meaningful. We're here for very short amount of time, if you think about time, and we spend so much of our time in our work environment. We really want it to mean something. And I just knew that my calling, if you would be, is to be in this impactful world of healthcare and technology. And so that was the aha personal moment. But I'll tell you the three structural themes that are happening in healthcare today. One is the enablement of technology in healthcare has been so far in the past. I used to joke, and this is pre AI, but I'd still say this: if we just had SaaS and mobile, we'd be so much further than we are today. And I just think that you got to remember we only digitized files just like 15 years ago. And that's been a progressive journey, right? You didn't do it overnight. We had to have the High Trust Act and other legislative and incentives to digitize the data in healthcare. So we are in like very still like early innings. We want to talk about baseball. We're like in the third or fourth inning of kind of where technology can take us, and then of course where AI can really take us is still something that we just need data integration layers and data liquidity to like then have AI sitting on top of that. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But really, the enablement of the healthcare space, I think, and especially how important that is given macro. It's a $5 trillion industry in which we do not have enough doctors for the demand, because we will look more like Japan by 2035 in terms of our aging population. And we don't have enough primary care. We don't have enough nurses to serve that. We all know about provider burnout, especially post COVID. There's just so many reasons why technology is essential and imperative for this space. Second thing is the value chains. I'd say the value in the business of healthcare is changing. People might know that in our area there's a lot of fee for service, right? People get paid for actions versus where we want to orient ourselves, which is value-based care, where people get paid for outcomes. So no longer how many times you go to the hospital is how people should be paid. It's more that you are, as a diabetic or a hypertensive patient, avoid the hospital because you're actually doing preventative measures, you're having more primary care, and we avoid acute situations. So that's like a change that's undergirding the US healthcare system. The other area, we even see this even in today, is with GLP-1s, right? We're seeing kind of what I call like a direct to consumer movement of what's happening in our pharma value chain, of people demanding these drugs because they are so effective. And I don't even think we've seen all of the indications that they'll be effective for. That's changing like pharmacy and pharma and how people get their drugs, which is a really interesting opportunistic time. So again, those value chains. And the third big area we see is obviously post-COVID, where consumers want to interact with their healthcare system just like they do with their other parts of their spend in their household, just like transportation or food. I really want care to meet me where I am, right? And to be, a seamless experience, that I truly can get that care for when I need. I can book that appointment. I can understand my next steps, right? And, get some delivery of these services or goods or, therapeutics to the home, like all these things that you have in other walks of life. So when you ask like also the why now, it's truly the enablement of healthcare has such a long way to go, the tech enablement of healthcare. The value chains are shifting before our eyes, and the consumerization of this space, we have a long way to go, but that is what people want. And so these three trend lines are really to say, why now? Why does healthcare in this $5 billion industry have to change with technology? And I think we have a lot of the tools and capability sets to make this a very different experience over the next 5 to 10 years.
It's an incredibly articulate answer. But I know that the success that you've had is partly because you understand where the space is headed and you understand the problem, but it's also because you've managed to attract and find great people. Investing at its core, it's such a human pursuit. Maybe I'd love to hear just a story about an entrepreneur you met, maybe for the first time, where you just said, this person lit up a room, must write a check to this person.
Yeah. Well, let me go back. I love frameworks and I love thinking in that way. I'll tell you the framework we use, and we use it throughout our organization, and it's 3 core values. This is one of the first acts when we started to build, when I started to build the team at Define, is like sit down and say, what are our core values? That's defining healthcare, defining partnership, and defining leadership. And this sets the OKRs for our team. This is my table of contents for every LP meeting. And this absolutely guides how we think about, to your point, how do we kind of make these decisions when we meet an entrepreneur? So the first one, defining healthcare, is really getting at the vision of this entrepreneur, right? And if, we invest at both seed, Series A, and Series B. So of course, the detailed of that vision might be more evolved between a seed and a Series B. But I do think there's core attributes of what we call a V1, V2, V3 approach. So V1 is, who are you today, typically articulated by a wedge point or a wedge use case. You then earn the right tomorrow to be a platform from that wedge use case. That's V2. And then we say, if you're the dominant platform, how do you move to V3 and really change the healthcare system? And so we often ask, and so one of these founders I'll just think about is, he was a pharmacist by training. He built the back-end technology stack for Mark Cuban's Cost Plus as well as Optum Store. I mean, this guy, when you talk about V1, V2, V3, it's like, this is exactly what we're going to do. Now, let's be real, Dan, it all doesn't play out always exactly. But if you don't have that core vision of a V1, V2, V3 approach in our mind, especially in healthcare, because there's such a complexity of constituents you have to work with, and work within, and sometimes innovate around or innovate against, you really have to understand that. And for someone who had literally been a pharmacist and to now where he is, he's built an AI pharmacy platform for health systems. There's no greater person to really understand that defining healthcare vision. And that really set him apart when we talked about that. The second core value is defining partnership. And for an entrepreneur, that really typically means, we have a lot of constituents, but for partners is, how do they understand the strategics? And usually in healthcare, now I've invested outside in, inside out innovation, I would call it, in healthcare. But really, can they present in front of a strategic? A strategic could be a health system, a payer, a employer, or a life science company. These tend to be the buyers of innovation in the healthcare economy. How they talk about partnership, how they think about value to that particular strategic, and talking at that C-suite level and truly building to that is really important, and really sets apart like how they think about go-to-market motion and how they articulate that value, that ROI, which I think is going to be really important, especially in AI. This particular entrepreneur knew exactly about, in his world, how do we think about script capture? How do we think about the business intelligence layer of pharmacy within, just had multiple value points and ROI points that he could express to, CEOs, C-suite of these, which was very clear. And we knew this was like top 3 needs for their particular constituents, right? Because it is a noisy, noisy time. And if you're not that top 3 with then what's the corresponding ROI, you just can't break through that noise. So saw that. And the third element is defining leadership. This is very much, we use this as the culture of define who we are as leaders, but it's also our community that we have around us. And that means our entrepreneurs. And so our kind of value set is like, do you have clarity of vision, teamwork and collaboration, diverse perspectives? We call it operational relentlessness, or GSD. We like to get stuff done here. And everything done at the highest of ethical standard. And why do I say that? We will only invest in entrepreneurs where I would use those goods and services on myself. So of course, I was on the board of HIMSS, but I was a HIMSS customer. I have invested in companies like TIA and Women's Health. That's my primary care provider. When I had gestational diabetes, I used Livongo on myself to take my use their glucometer, right? And to help manage my gestational diabetes. And we've just got to really believe that entrepreneur is doing everything at the highest ethical and clinical standard, because this is healthcare and it's all about trust. trust to the decisions they will make, trust in how they will treat the strategics who are our partners. 72% of the time we introduce these founders to their early customers, and the payers, the providers, the life science, and the employers trust us to do our diligence and work with the right people that espouse this value system that I am talking about. So it's just multiple orders of that. And, again, back to like, if you will, these are the three areas: defining healthcare, defining partnership, and defining leadership, that when we meet someone that kind of we see them go off the charts in that, like, we just want to partner and change healthcare with them.
So glad that you shared the last element of the thesis about the ethical framework when you're investing. Something we talk about a lot on this podcast is the intersection of AI and technology and data, and certainly in the field of healthcare. We can't have the conversation without thinking about not what we can do, but what we should do. Talk me through, when you're evaluating the AI components of businesses that you're evaluating, how do you think about the intersection of ethics and AI?
Yeah. I think we always need to know the personal story of what does success look like for this individual, because the founder and the CEO much flows from, I'd say founding team overall too, if it's not just the CEO, flows through like, what does success look like? We ask a very simple question, which there's a lot of answers to that. But what's really motivating you to do this? This gets back to what are all the there's so many decisions beyond the boardroom, which typically, beyond the meetings that we have with the entrepreneur, the boardroom, that they are making all the time, and the company they keep. So obviously the network effect of our network, who we know, who we believe are ethical leaders, like back to then, the entrepreneurs themselves. And it's all in the like, also, do they have a values or mission statement system to how they are managing their company? And then there's the more, I'd say, like executional layer and orientation, Dan, which is, on an AI basis, obviously, depending what we're doing, like, how do they think about data? How do they think about human in the loop? All of these, and I'd say there's a distinguishing nature in healthcare. We think there's like an evolution. There are differences. Like the first, I think, wave of AI in healthcare has been operational efficiency, administrative efficiency, right? There's so much inefficiency in healthcare, and that has been an easier place to start for AI, right? Then we believe we're moving, and we think we're already starting this, is into what I call clinical workflow, right? How are we now helping augment our clinicians? And we think like the last bastion, which, we're going to itch into it now, where the puck is headed and how fast, is what we call clinical decision support, where AI is actually making clinical decisions, if you will. So there's a difference, we think, between, looking at an individual and a patient and saying they have diabetes, that's clinical decisioning, versus, okay, the doctor's already said that they have diabetes. Now there's like 4 things we need to do. That's clinical workflow, which is we need to get a CGM. They need to visit an endocrinologist, right? There's all these things that need to happen once someone's been diagnosed. That to us is clinical workflow. So again, we think there's going to be this, we believe in this progression of operational administrative inefficiencies, then clinical workflow and protocol, and then clinical decision support. So depending where the company is in this trajectory, as I outline, how they think about human in the loop. If we're talking about clinical care, are they using society's, kind of approved protocols or patient-reported outcomes tools, or things that have clinical data behind them, right, as the guardrails to whatever care they might be doing? So those are some elements, like from an execution beyond the like strategy of who is this person, how do they create a culture, what does success look like, what is their network in the company they keep, all the way down to like executional items, like human in the loop, and these kinds of areas. But that is definitely tailored to what area of healthcare and AI that they're innovating in.
You mentioned that the US healthcare system will maybe look closer to the Japanese healthcare system, and based on kind of changing demographics. increasingly that elderly population will be encountering health experiences that presumably involve more AI-driven technologies. How do you, as an investor, a parent, a daughter, think about where are the edges between where you're comfortable having AI influence your healthcare outcomes, and then where you'd say maybe it's a line we shouldn't cross?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like prototypical sandwich generation right now, right? My parents are 80. I have two young kids that are 9 and 7. So your question is like very real and near right now, especially as my parents age. And, I think it gets back to what I was talking about is I do think we're moving from the era of operational kind of where AI is working on operational aspects to like clinical workflow. So augmenting physicians, right? To say, they might be seeing a patient and there's information they need, right? Like, how can we help? There's still human in the loop on that, or they want to know the latest clinical guidelines in a particular area, right? That can help. Or helping create an appointment as a follow-up visit so we can have care based on some clinical assessment they have. So all of that to me is like what I call clinical workflow. And I think we are into that era right now. I do think where we're maybe not exactly there is where AI is the doctor assessing, right? And that's clinical decision support. I think that is later. Now, is that 1 year from now? Is that 5 years from now? Because there is a trust factor. And I think what happens, and this happened to us if you take the analogy of COVID, right? Remember, most care was done in person, right? So it took COVID to all of a sudden not only get trust of patients to get care virtually through a Zoom and meet a doctor through that way. It also needed cultural, change from doctors to practice this way. And we needed this macro situation to kind of like change both sides of that equation. And now I think many of us have probably had virtual care to some form or fashion where it feels somewhat commonplace to supplement an in-person visit with something, again, depending on the acuity of what we're talking about. I think this is going to be the same thing for AI. Now, when this happens that's the crystal ball, but it will happen where, we're going to have care deserts, or we just don't, to your point, and is it 2035, we do not have enough physicians. And it's already happening now. Think about it. Most primary care appointments, that can take for women, and we've again measured this with Tia, it's like 3 months plus. So would I rather not get anything and wait 3 months, even for cancer care, which is we're building a company with Dana-Farber now called Defiant Health around breast cancer. When people are suspected from their primary care, they do not get an appointment for imaging and biopsy. Average wait times, again, are 2 to 3 months, and you might have cancer at this point. And that's a tragedy. And that's where you'd say, okay, so we actually speed up those appointments. You will know in 72 hours. You'll have the biopsy, you'll have the imaging. We have clinical wraparound services. Now, this isn't AI, but I do think there's something to be said of access versus having no access. And so is that, in the day and age where we truly our wait times get to 6 months, like, would you rather just wait or have something that's AI assisted? There's care deserts, rural health. We can talk about that. And obviously what's happening with Medicaid, are there areas with which we feel comfortable where AI might be a little further ahead because the alternative is no care. And I think and then people getting accustomed to that, like back to COVID and what happened there, where someone has their first visit because they don't want to wait for whatever reason, 2, 3, 6 months. And they're like, you know what, I kind of got what I needed. Now, I still think we're going to have physician assisted, right? Panels. So panel is how many patients a physician can see. we can increase those panel sizes, but still have a physician in the loop. But I do think there will be a time where in certain areas where we say, you know what, I will go with something AI led because of a particular situation or acuity level that's low acuity. And we can get there. But I think this will take some time. And obviously the payment codes have not evolved around this aspect, right? Again, in a fee for service world, most of our codes are dealt on time. And obviously, if we believe in the efficiencies of AI, we need to change those kinds of reimbursement codes and how we think about care going forward.
It's so rational when you describe it like that way, with Tia Health as an example, or Defiant, that care sooner is almost always preferable to no care past the point of where the care would matter. And yet, kind of feels to me like as a society, we're not ready to accept a bad automated decision. And the fact is, as soon as we introduce automation, which provides the benefits that you described, we are introducing risk. The automated decisions will sometimes be false positives, they'll be bad decisions, and they'll sometimes be false negatives where they won't make a decision that they could make. What's it going to take for, patients to accept that maybe we add a little bit of risk to improve patient outcomes?
Yeah, no, I think you're describing, where we might be today, and then very different. Like all of a sudden, it goes to AI doctors. I think there's what I think is incremental changes, right? There's a lot of ways you could do this. I think first and foremost, though, before any kind of touch point of clinical decision making, you will have to do clinical studies. You will have to show that you are at least on par, and that has been shown, Dan, right? That AI can almost be at a certain level of clinical licensure today. It'll only get better, right? But I think as a company, you need to show that data, right? And make sure on par. But there's ways to check and balance this over time, right? It's not just you're seeing a doctor in person and then all of a sudden, or you're seeing an AI doctor and there's no touch points at all with a human. I think there's so many ways. Could someone see AI just to get a lay of the land, maybe to get 2/3 of their questions answered, and the other third, they wait 2 more weeks and a doctor comes in, right? I think there are ways, and we've done that with some of our clinical care, where you're going to get your virtual intake virtually on Zoom, and then you go in to the office for another portion of your visit to actually get the more, physical primary care things done. I mean, we've actually done that in some companies where you're starting to kind of, again, what's the right mix and shift over time? But of course, AI has to prove itself, I think, to be equivalent, right, to a doctor. There should be that clinical data and rigor. And then how we meld that experience, I think, is going to be a whole journey that we're going to have to walk in. And it is an imperative in healthcare. Now, do we get all the way to doctor-led AI? We can discuss that, because I think there is a lot of things about medicine. I'll be the first thing. When COVID hit, there were some venture capitalists doctors are gone, or, we can do everything virtually. And I was the first to say, no, I believe in hybrid environments. Depending on the acuity level, we're never going to, I'm going to state the obvious here. You're never going to treat cancer virtually, right? So it really depends. Are we looking at, I like an access, if you will, on primary care kind of services is the first leg. The next is chronic care diseases like diabetes or hypertension. And then you have specialty care, which is cancer care, musculoskeletal as in a thing. And I think your hybridization with AI is going to really change depending on those 3 segments as well.
It's a really savvy answer. It's not going to happen all at once. It will happen with informed patients, and the AI will always be measured based on outcomes that we know from doctors. So until it's at least as accurate or more, it won't be something that's airdropped on an unsuspecting population.
That's right.
Um,
Absolutely.
my undergrad roommate, who you probably know, is a radiologist. Um, Pretty much since he graduated with his degree in radiology, he's been told consistently that we have seen the last class of human radiologists graduate, and it seems like we're perpetually right, years almost like self-driving cars, right? What is I consider you an expert, your perspective on is it just fate, a fait accompli that we don't need radiologists sometime in the future?
Um, you know, it's so interesting you say this because I think like I will say this is something about healthcare. I've embraced this obviously to pick this space and be in it. Things don't happen as fast as you think. And for a lot of different reasons, it might not even be the technology. It's what we call, and this is where I think some advantage comes in, workflow. It's the integrations. Like there's so much aspect to say all of us, and I think there's a lot of change management. I don't, in our world, I think we've talked a lot more define about change management and how our companies might really need to recognize how much change management they need to do in an organization, even though they might have a V1 wedge use case, or definitely in V2 and absolutely in V3 in our way of thinking. So I think like you just in these certain fields, it's not like, okay, could the technology detect something from images? I think we've all said, yeah, that could be pretty good, but there's so much about workflow, integrations, trust, change management that needs to like happen in the system to actually make the ROI and the value be realized. And there's nothing, I'd say healthcare again is one of these systems because it's so fragmented in so many ways. Things don't happen overnight. I think the impetus and the vision is there. And as an investor, I'll say you might know where the puck is headed, but you can't skate too far ahead of it due to these areas that I'm talking about.
Good framing. You see probably more interesting pitches in a week than anyone else will see in a lifetime. I think I'll go out on a limb and say that. What's one combination of a problem, an entrepreneur, a pitch that if it were your next meeting, you'd say yes on the spot?
Yeah, I mean, we just had a great debate this morning, which was just so much fun when I think about our team, our investment team, and also our venture partners. So we have people like Bruce Broussard, former CEO of Humana, at the table, Frank Williams, former CEO of Advisory Board, one of the most influential provider groups, as well as CEO of Evolent previously, Carolyn McGill from the pharma space. So we literally are like sitting around debating and in the end, we were the core of like, what will a consumer healthcare company be like in the future? Obviously, we've been humbly, I think one of the forefront players like HIMSS. We invested in that company back in 2019, almost 6 years ago. And so I think we've really, thought long and hard and bet on certain verticals, like going into a more direct consumer motion, but like a true healthcare brand and a healthcare company. And so we were debating a very interesting fact of like, do we believe it's outside in or inside out? And what I mean by outside in is, do you go direct to consumer and like but you have to wrap into the healthcare system at some point. If you're really going to derive value, and we were talking about care coordination back to sandwich generation and the aging senior, there are a lot of companies we're seeing right now around care coordination and helping, truly be like what I think is a healthcare concierge or healthcare assistant. And everyone should have one. I think we need one considering how complex our healthcare system is. And is that an outside in or an inside out? Because both these halves actually have to come together in this space, which I think is very different than in, let's say, traditional consumer or CPG or other areas. Because of the nature of healthcare. And so we still want to see that company. I think with AI, we're going to see that company. But how do you think about product, how you think about workflow and integration is something that we had a real fun time discussing today.
Fascinating. Good advice to all those entrepreneurs out there. Lynne, I got to get you off the hot seat. I hate to because this one's so much fun, but you're not going anywhere without answering one last important question for me. What does today's Lynne Chou O'Keefe say to that scared undergrad in Terman studying linear programming? Just hypothetically speaking, what's your advice? What's the advice to that kid version of Lynne?
Oh, I think there's that younger me always felt like I have to work that much harder, build from ground up. And I think that are all right things. And I think really at some point to say, like, I'm now going to make this impact and kind of, step forward versus learning. And when you do that in your career, I think it's like really, really important. I am the first to say, like, I don't think you go out in the world and just like, you can learn on the job, sure, but I think there is some real value. But then when do you make that switch to bet on yourself? And I think that's something really interesting right now, also with AI. So Dan and I were at Terman, coding or doing whatever we were doing. We were in a very different generation technologically. And I think what's so interesting now too is like that decision and those types of decisions in an AI world. So I don't have like an answer of what's the right one, but I think there's so much with these tools that you can do so much quicker. But there are some areas, like I talk about, workflow and integrations and like to really build something lasting with true ROI and value, like when's that right turn from learning to like making the impact yourself is like a really interesting one.
Well, I can say that you are out changing the world, and your friends and I know your family are so proud of you. So thank you for being you.
Well, Dan, thank you for being a part of, the journey, if you will, and so many things that we talked about when we were younger and just like did together, if you will, like, appreciate you. And I've always loved like your drive. And I mean, we said this before this is like, doing this podcast is just like one of many things you do. You just enter life with such curiosity and drive and action. It's really unparalleled. So thank you for doing this podcast too.
My pleasure. Please take me up on the offer. Come back and hang out more often. All right. On the podcast and elsewhere. But to all of our listeners, thank you for participating in today's group therapy session between Lynne and myself. That's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. Lynne, before I can let you go, where can the audience learn more about you and your team's great work?
Yeah, well, obviously we're on LinkedIn, but definevc.com is our website. We have insights there. You can get on our newsletter. We'd love to learn from you if there are great entrepreneurs out there innovating in healthcare. So thank you again.
Brilliant work. Well, as always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Reign. And of course, we are back next week with another fascinating guest.
Yo, it's the end of the show, time to power it down. AI's the sis, but humans wear the crown. Team Human in the house, got the vibe so clever. Dan Turchin from People Reign, making us better. We learned about AI for humans. We're ready to conquer the future, that's all for now. See you next time.